Starts Sunday at 8 sharp. Bloody good adventures for your mind.
Doomsday viruses must be understood before they can be eradicated. At facilities like these, scientists routinely handle viruses that, given the right circumstances, could end life on Earth as we know it. One of the world's leading watchdogs for the next deadly virus outbreak is U.S. AMRID, the United States Army's ultra-secure lab for defense research at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Every day, scientists study some of the most dangerous organisms on Earth.
USAMRID is the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. We understand and study the unique diseases that are of military interest, either from a biological warfare threat or from an endemic infectious disease threat.
Many of these doomsday diseases can only be handled in a maximum biocontainment facility called Biosafety Level 4. U.S. AMRID is one of only 9 facilities in the world that can analyze these diseases.
Biocontainment labs are the labs where we work with the more infectious agents. Then the Bio 4 level labs are the ones that are the most highly hazardous. And those are the viral agents, the hemorrhagic fever virus agents.
Elaborate safety measures go into the construction of these labs. These measures include high-tech security systems that monitor access 24 hours a day to make sure that these biological agents will not escape.
These are laboratories that have been built specifically for BioLevel 4 and where they have a large number of special engineering concerns. We've designed filters so the virus can't escape, but we don't just have one filter, we have 2 filters. Everything has redundant backups in order to keep the virus from escaping from the laboratory and allow you to work safely within them.
The scientists who work here know that their best defense is their security procedure. For if this procedure is breached in any way, death is the likely result.
For the Bio Level 4 containment laboratories, we do not have vaccines, and we have to provide physical protection for our scientists in those laboratories. And that's where we have the positive pressure spacesuits.
These high-tech spacesuits are filled with pressurized air. Any tear in the suit will blow the dangerous microbes away from the puncture.
We've had a couple of scares where we've had suits that have ripped, but we have a very good safety margin. And it's because we only let senior experienced people work in these areas. Because really working in a suit means zero tolerance of making a mistake and doing one of those things that can in fact rip the suit and kill you. And we all recognize that the reason we're working on these particular viruses in a BL4 is that there is no vaccine and that we do not yet have a proven therapy for them.
U.S. AMRID is one of the only research facilities which offers hope of finding a cure for some of these doomsday viruses.
There are things you can't do other places because you can't safely do the same techniques that other universities could do on a less dangerous virus. We frequently take drugs that have been used for other viruses and determine whether they'll work against viruses such as Ebola or smallpox.
Unfortunately, one of the deadliest viruses known to science is one that can mutate so fast that a vaccine is obsolete before it can be synthesized. And ironically, it is one of the most familiar to ordinary people. The virus even has a nickname, the flu. And this doomsday flu virus will likely emerge from the most unlikely of places.
We think that the next one, which is going to come in the next year or two and be very dangerous, is going to come from either pigs or chickens. I can't tell you now which until it happens.
And this pandemic already has happened within this century. The year was 1918. World War I was over. And the reason for the war's end wasn't political. It was viral.
World War I stopped because so many French, English, American, and German soldiers, young 18-year-old men, died of influenza. There was no one left to put on the battlefields. So flu actually stopped World War I because it killed so many troops.
The world's population at that time was about 2 billion people. In a period of slightly over a year, about 1 billion people got infected. So about half the world's population became infected with the virus. 25 million people died.
For centuries prior to World War I, influenza, also known as the flu virus, had killed millions of victims.
Usually when scientists like myself discuss an epidemic of influenza, we're talking about 10% of a population being infected. Okay, we call that an epidemic. A pandemic is a global epidemic of huge proportion, and we're talking about 40% of the world being infected at the same time. That happened in 1890. That happened in 1917 and 18. It happened in 1958, and it happened in 1968, the Hong Kong flu. We have not had one since 1968. That's almost 30 years, and we are well overdue.
When a deadly new flu virus emerged in China in 1997, scientists rushed to isolate it. They feared it could become a virus X and spread throughout the world, killing thousands at first, and then millions.
This past winter, when they discovered what was called the avian influenza or the chicken flu in Hong Kong, those of us in influenza, we were scared stiff. Was this going to be the next influenza pandemic?
A lot of influenza viruses do seem to come from China, and we don't really know why that is. There has been some speculation that part of this may relate to the fact that there is a much closer contact between people and animals, in particular domestic poultry and swine.
It is ironic that the doomsday virus so feared by scientists could be one that is so familiar to so many. A mutant strain of the flu could very well become the dreaded virus X. What would happen if a mutant strain of a killer flu descended upon a major city? The resulting scenario could be catastrophic.
In a severe epidemic, we're talking 70 to 100,000 Americans will die. Now, during the pandemic, it's going to be much greater than that. It will kill millions worldwide in spite of the fact that we have modern medicine. It will wreak havoc in those countries. It will kill millions of people.
What would happen now if one of those viruses emerged? Would it take 8 months to get around the world as the last one did? Or would it take a few weeks? Now, this is a very important question because it takes 6 months to prepare a flu vaccine and distribute it.
Under epidemic circumstances, I suspect they could make the vaccine in maybe 3 or 4 months. One of the problems with the current process of making the vaccine is it's grown in eggs. When the vaccine is made, millions and millions of eggs have to be harvested. If we get a notice today that there's a pandemic strain, we may not be able to do it as fast as we would like.
Imagine the job of distributing a vaccine to 5 billion people. The answer is it won't be distributed to all of them. My guess is that in developing countries we'll never get that. There won't be time to get the vaccine to them. But if that virus gets into New York 3 weeks after it breaks out, instead of 8 months, there won't be a vaccine.
Scientists can only speculate what would happen if a virus X flu swept through a major city like New York. Any modern city offers a determined virus many opportunities to spread.
You'll have a virus that was, in this circumstance, 40% lethal, moving around New York. You won't be able to avoid it. You've got to go out. You have to go to the mall. You have to go to the supermarket to get some food. You've got to go to work, or you get no money. What happens when people start getting it? They go down with a very serious illness. Even if they don't die, it'll decimate the population.
In modern-day society, it's very hard to prepare for a worst-case scenario type of situation in an area like New York City. The fact of the matter is that we come in contact with so many different people every day, and we have to even function in the society, that there's no real way to protect ourselves from those sorts of contacts. 5 people will infect 100. So you get 5, coughing and spluttering, sneezing, goes to 100. By the time the others are beginning to show symptoms, some of the first 5 will be in hospital, perhaps already dead. So they could be dead within hours. It'll spread very, very rapidly.
The current shortage of antiviral medications needed to treat the numbers of victims could prove deadly.
In this day and age, we do not have enough of the antiviral medications, amantadine or flumidine, to treat everyone in the world. We don't even have enough pills to treat everyone in the United States. We are not stockpiling it.
With the epidemic sweeping through the population, 2 classes would be created: those who were infected and those who are not. And when the classes collide, as one seeks quarantine safety, anything might happen. Previously unimaginable problems would be created. For example, how to best dispose of thousands upon thousands of dead bodies. Some experts believe that the only facility big enough to handle the storage and burning would be a large arena. Less than 50 miles away from New York, at the Hackensack University Medical Center in New Jersey, physicians are trying to prevent this nightmare from ever occurring. Here, doctors are studying the flu virus with the hope that they can stay one step ahead of its lethal mutations.
Influenza has the greatest concern in our country for causing death and severe morbidity. Influenza particularly is a virus that changes every year, so we have to keep up with those changes. And sometimes we're the first to actually identify the new agent that has not yet spread through our population, so therefore we're making pioneer efforts here to give unknown entities a name.
The virology lab also stores thousands of samples of viruses.
And what we have over here is an archive. And what we keep in here is everything that we want to study over time. We have things in this freezer that are 20 years or 25 years old. So we're able to store this until we're finished analyzing it, or we could store it for future studies maybe 10 years later and go back and see what was the strain of influenza circulating in 1997-98.
Communication between influenza researchers around the world is the only way to be prepared for a pandemic strain of influenza.
The CDC has put at least 6 listening posts in China. That there are virus labs there. They have the capability of identifying new viruses. These laboratories identify new strains. They track them. They want to see how widely they're spreading and how virulent they are in the southern hemisphere.
Flu researchers believe that we, as a population, need to take influenza very seriously if we are to protect ourselves from its potentially devastating consequences.
If an invading army came to the United States, killed 20,000 people in a matter of a couple months, and left, would we be upset? Of course we'd be upset. It'd be a disaster. But that disaster happens every 1 to 2 years in the United States. 20,000 people die from influenza every 1 to 2 years.
With the threat of global annihilation hanging over our heads, the question that scientists and laymen alike must ask is, what can we do? Many believe that the first step is understanding the magnitude of the problem.
As a doctor, I wouldn't be telling you all this frightening stuff for no purpose. The only purpose of telling you the truth and scaring people a little with the truth is if there's something that we can do about it.
The first steps in preventing the flu are quite simple and may be a lifesaver.
Well, the most important thing for someone to know about influenza virus is that it's generally transmitted from person to person, and there are a lot of precautions that one can take to protect oneself from contracting influenza. They can be careful about hand washing, and they can be mindful about their habits on travel also. It might be desirable to avoid confined areas for long periods of time with someone who's coughing or you think might have influenza.
I would tell the American public that every year, in between September 15th and November 15th, they ought to get themselves a flu shot. Today's vaccines are incredibly safe. They're very effective. If you get a flu shot, you have a 70% chance of being completely immune to the virus. In the 30% of people who are not totally protected, you have a much milder illness. Don't put it off. The flu virus vaccine is the way to keep from getting flu.
What about other emerging viruses? As they are most likely to be found in the tropical rainforests, protecting these areas is essential. For it is only our steady encroachment into these regions that puts people in contact with these viruses. If the conservation line can be drawn, the delicate balance that has protected our species can be maintained. But what about the threat of biological weapons? What can we do to protect ourselves? The U.S. Army recently launched a nationwide program that will train and prepare 120 major American cities on how to respond to biological disasters.
The medical public health authorities should know how to intervene, and they should also have educational materials available to inform the public about how to minimize their risk of exposure and how to seek treatment. Many fire departments, for example, have hazmat teams for dealing with hazardous material spills, but they are not equipped to deal with chemical nerve agents, which can be orders of magnitude more toxic, and they are definitely not equipped to deal with biological hazards. So I think this is a first step, but it's not enough. For example, the first responders need user-friendly equipment for detecting chemical and biological agents so that they know that they're in the presence of an invisible yet toxic threat.
The U.S. military is also developing new technologies to detect and sense biological agents out in the battlefield.
I think the technology is coming along very rapidly, so you'll actually be able to have something like a smoke detector for many of these biological agents soon.
The Department of Defense is developing medical technologies that will instantly attack deadly biological agents on a cellular level.
I would hope that publicity about this threat does not cause people to overreact. The odds of such an attack are so low that most people would never encounter it in their lifetimes. It has to be put in perspective. One is at much greater risk just driving in one's car than potentially being exposed to a biological terrorist attack.
The first step in making sure that we are safe is learning all that we can about the threats that we face. And knowledge, in this case, may have the power to save the planet.
Why should we tell people all this? Why don't we keep it amongst scientists? The politicians don't listen to scientists, and the only way of communicating to the public is through the media. And I think it's important that that pressure is brought to bear upon politicians so that the purse strings are loosened a little bit and we take proper precautions, and that we set up sentinel laboratories and diagnostic facilities in the areas where these things are coming from, so that in the event of a new plague coming out of one of these areas, it can be stopped at source.
Adrenaline rush.